Yes, that's right. It's the squeeze. It's presented by Primetime Sports Talk. My name is Logan Lockhart. That right there is Tyler Milliken. And yes, if you're watching, it's on YouTube. If you're listening, it's wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you like to get them. Okay, it's your choice. We're not forcing you into anything. If you want to listen, you can listen anyhow and way you want. Tyler, how you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. I can't complain. Big Red Sox series going on currently against the Rays, where there's so many storylines from, the AL East, battle between first place with the Red Sox barely sitting in first. Wander Franco, the number one prospect in baseball, making his debut and really just showing everybody why he is the number one prospect immediately. And along with the foreign substance stuff, baseball's crazy right now, for better or for worse.
Okay, Wander Franco, that was a memorable debut for a lot of reasons. I'm going to point to the crowd, first of all. They were electric at the Trop yesterday. And I was watching on Nesson, and I think it was Eckersley who said, I don't think I've ever heard this place this electric. And I'm going, yeah, well, there's been some playoff games here and there. That final day of the 2011 season, that was pretty electric. But it reminded me of all those moments last night for Franco. Place was electric, and he delivered, and that alone makes that a memorable debut.
100%. You're special when you can fill that ballpark, which, not to disrespect Rays fans, I know they'll agree with me. It's a dump. Nobody wants to play there. No one enjoys the experience from a fan or player perspective. And you saw the ugly parts of it during the game. Rafael Devers hit the catwalk. It's a double, and it's corny. Even as someone who, is watching from the Red Sox side, it's like, that's not baseball. You shouldn't hit a skyscraper pop up and it's bouncing off things. But I saw pictures outside the stadium. A friend of mine, Jordan Moore, who lives down in that area, was taking pictures outside the ballpark, lines to get in. And that's when Wander Franco is that kind of generational talent. We're talking about, the next guy with an 80 hit tool on the 2080 scale. And the only other prospect to do that in the past 10 years, your guy, Vlad Guerrero Jr.
There you go, two of them. That's what it reminded me of, really. And, with the Trop and all that, they're even getting frustrated with the bullpens being in foul territory and Dahlbeck's having some trouble with the distraction of that. It was one of those games, and they did say it on Nesson a million times, but they were right. It really did have everything, right? I mean, the base running blunders are actually starting to concern me. There was a piece on ESPN even outlining the base running and how it's really gone downhill over the last few years. And yesterday, I don't know what was going on. Brett Phillips, okay, he just forgot, right? He forgot that there was an intentional walk. If you haven't seen that, I would check it out because, again, there were some blunders in that game yesterday where you really got to open your eyes and acknowledge them, But so that game had everything. And that's why it's a memorable debut. Wander Franco, he's going to be one of these guys. I don't know if he's going to hit for huge power numbers in this league. I think he's going to be a 300 hitter. I really do. But it was memorable. What other memorable debuts that you've watched, okay, in the past 10, 15, 20 years, however far back you want to go, do you want to bring up? Let's do three each.
Okay, so do you want to go back and forth, or should I go all three down? How do you feel?
Let's go back and forth and see how they match up against each other.
First guy I'm going to go with, as a Red Sox fan, I got to do it. Daniel Nava, June 12th, 2010 against the Phillies, going 2 for 4, hits a grand slam off our old friend Joe Blanton. Just an absolute bomb. And I look back at this debut and, Daniel Nava he was kind of an organizational depth guy. We all know the story, came from indie ball, got sold to the Red Sox for like $1. He was the equipment manager on his college baseball team. Just about all the things you love about baseball wrapped in. And he just comes up and hits an absolute rocket for that grand slam. And I think back to it, just wild against the Phillies. And when you don't expect the guy to come in and kind of make that impact, it's the complete opposite of Wander Franco. Everyone thinks of Wander Franco and you're like, oh, this will be the next top prospect to do something crazy. There were no expectations for Daniel Nava, and he raised the bar to the highest level in a debut.
I'm happy you mentioned Daniel Nava because my guy is also a guy who hit his first career home run on the first career pitch he ever saw in the big leagues, August 7th, 2010. It's at the Rogers Center. It's JP Arancibia, the catcher. This is against the Rays. It was on a Saturday. I remember this very well. And he had 4 hits in his first 4 at-bats. He finished the day 4 for 5. He hit 2 home runs. He had a double. He had a single. It was one of those debuts that just really gave you optimism instantly. I believe he was 26 years old at the time. And from the catching position, it was something that hadn't been seen in Toronto in almost 20 years. It was really exciting. And that series, why it's memorable as well. The next day, it was Brandon Morrow's probably greatest performance of his career against the Rays. He had 17 strikeouts. That was one of the series of the Blue Jays 2010s that people still look at. It was against the Rays, early August 2010, and you had the Aaron Sebia debut, and you had Brandon Morrow, who almost had a no-hitter. He had it in the ninth inning with 2 outs, 1 out, whatever it was, and striking out 17. So I kind of mixed in the two. Morrow was not a debut, but it's all the moment of the weekend, and it got kicked off with Aaron Sebia.
Yeah, I remember thinking back to JP Arancibia, and he was one of the names I kind of thought of going through. And there were so many crazy debuts in 2010. It's funny, Nava was 2010. My other 2 picks are in 2010 as well. So kind of a really just weird time for the sport of baseball. And people forget, obviously JP Arancibia's career didn't play or pan out the way many had hoped. But coming up as a catcher, he had his high draft pedigree and belief in terms of ceiling as really any catching prospect at that time in the sport. And to see those 2 home runs, it felt like, oh, okay, this is the next Blue Jay stud for years to come.
Absolutely. And with the catching position, it's almost one of those positions. It's like a starting pitcher, and we're seeing it now with the upcoming MLB draft. It's like, all right, well, there's Jack Leiter, but you know what? If there's a franchise catcher available, why not go in that direction? I kind of mix the two together sometimes. It's almost like a quarterback, right? If there's a franchise quarterback and you need a quarterback, you're taking him 100%. And it's like that with starting pitching. So, yeah, the catching position for sure. When you see a stud prospect come out, the excitement, I feel like it's just amplified.
100%. And, I'll throw that right in with my next one. We're, hitting on those kind of top high pedigree prospects. Opening day, 2010, there weren't many prospects I can remember, at least in recent time, being as hyped as Jason Hayward was. Everyone remembered Jason Hayward had a ridiculous spring training for the ages, hitting everything in sight, shining on defense. And the Braves at that time, they were ready to bet on it. This is before we really had a lot of the conversations about team control and stuff like that. This era of baseball was, listen, if you have a guy who's ready to play in the big leagues and you think he's going to be a stud, you call him up. And while Jason Hayward had his ups and downs as a rookie, if we remember the good and bad, his debut was as, kind of memorable as it's going to get. Homered in his first at bat. He went 2 for 5 on the day. It was really everything you could kind of hope for in it. For many people who looked at the Braves at that time and were kind of, questioning the decision, did they act a little bit too quickly? He, at least for that one day, made them look great. And I just remember that home run and how loud that ballpark was. It's one of those images that's always in my head.
Jason Hayward was the number 1 prospect in baseball. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a time when it was Jason Hayward number 1, Steven Strasburg number 2. That was kind of the 1 and 2 in baseball. And that says a lot, right? Because we think back to that time. It's like Steven Strasburg, this guy's going to be a perennial Cy Young winner. No doubt about it. Who else can top him for prospects? Well, it was Jason Hayward.
And it's funny enough, you kind of beat me to my punch, Logan. Steven Strasburg was my 3rd pick. Obviously he was a couple months later, June of that year. And we remember, I will look at Steven Strasburg as the most electric prospect debut of all time. For a franchise where the Nationals were hopeless, nothing was going right for them. Steven Strasburg was the first piece, even before Bryce Harper at that time, that was going to change everything for them. That was going to get them back on the map. That, dating back to the Expos days, was going to give this franchise the life they needed. And we remember how empty those ballparks were for years. The early days of Ryan Zimmerman just slugging out and doing his thing down there. But when Steven Strasburg showed up, that ballpark filled up, and it was as electric as anything you can remember. 7 innings against the Pirates. I believe he struck out 14 that night. And that 14 was, I believe, he was the 3rd pitcher ever to strike out 14 since 1908 in their debut. We remember at the time, Strasburg, there were innings limits. There were concerns over his arm. They were trying to protect him. But to see everything on display, and obviously we've seen the ups and downs, and, there's been some great Steven Strasburg moments since then. But to see the number 1 prospect in baseball out of San Diego State come out and just do his thing, it was as special as it gets. And it speaks to how special Jason Hayward was at that time as well.
It sparked a new era in D.C., and of course, Bryce Harper came shortly after, but Strasburg was the guy that was going to anchor the team for years to come, and 9 years later, they have a World Series. So that was the start of it. I always look back to Strasburg's debut and say that was the start of a new era. I'm going to go with a couple pitchers for my remaining 2. Here's one that I don't think a lot of people think of. And people, especially maybe Dodger fans, won't like to think back on it because of what could have been. But Ross Stripling in 2016, April 8th, some injuries gave him an opportunity to start. He was the fifth starter that year, and he's got a no-hitter going into the eighth inning in his major league debut. I mean, are you kidding me? And he walks a batter. I believe he walked 4 overall, but he walked 1 in the eighth. Dave Roberts, who I think that was his first year as the Dodgers manager, comes out, takes him out. We're all in shock. That was one of the first times that I can remember. And it happened a couple times before this, but really to this extent, where a manager comes out and takes out a pitcher when he's got a no-hitter going. In our minds growing up, we always thought that would never happen. There's no doubt about it. You just let him pitch until someone gets a hit. No, Dave Roberts, absolutely not. Stripling after the game said he agreed with the decision. But that, to me, when you're in your major league debut and you got a no-hitter going in the eighth, I'm always going to remember that. He only struck out 4, but whatever. That's his MLB debut.
Yeah, and we remember the pitch count was high there. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he got pulled super early or anything like that. But I felt like that was a little bit of that bridge period where it no longer was the old school mindset of that. Listen, I don't care if you're Edwin Jackson and you're throwing 140 pitches. You're going to gut it out until you give it up. And if you find a way to get it done, you got it done. And Dave Roberts at that time, there were a lot of people upset with that decision. A lot of people questioning it. I think if you saw it in today, no one would bat a single eye to it, which speaks to how different, baseball really is at this point. But that's another one. And that's kind of one of those moments. Obviously, Ross Stripling, he's been a fine player. We know, obviously, up in Toronto now, going through some drama himself, but handling it well. Another one of those weird debuts, but, talk about it. You look at that. For Ross Stripling, it goes as, crazy as, as well as you could have imagined.
It happened just this past week in Major League Baseball. Jake Odorizzi had a no-hitter going in Baltimore. Dusty Baker takes him out. Now, it wasn't the eighth inning. It was much earlier than that. But still, it's common. No one's batting an eye anymore.
No, especially in a guy like Jake Odorizzi, who's dealt with health problems. This past year, didn't pitch a ton last year because of injuries too. In this day and age, it's about protecting the player before anything. And while no hitters are still super special, even, they've kind of lost a little bit of their value this year. History is history, but at the end of the day, you protect the future over history at this point.
Absolutely. Now, my final one is actually a relief pitcher. How about this? And this is another electric scene that I remember. Now, Strasburg was electric, just like Franco yesterday was an electric scene at the home ballpark. Aroldis Chapman, August 31st, 2010. Now, let's remember here, this is 2010. This isn't the day when guys are coming out of the pen throwing 98 and no one's even talking about it, about how guys' velocity is so high. This is a guy coming out who defected from Cuba, and he's throwing 100. He's throwing 102. I think one of his pitches hit 103. And the crowd, the Reds crowd, there's just something about it. They're like, wow, what do we have our hands on here? And remember, the Reds, they made the playoffs that year. They went up against Halliday's Phillies. But, when you really think about it, that's a debut that you always remember. It was just one inning. But every pitch, and he was perfect. I think he only threw one ball the entire time. He faced 3 batters. I was watching that back earlier today because I knew we were going to do this, and I'm going, wow, that Great American Ballpark, that was rocking that day for a relief pitcher's debut.
Yeah, and like you said, especially from the left side, throwing that kind of heat. Relievers at that time, you had 96, 95 out of the bullpen. When people were like, all right, that's something serious to be gunning up 100. And, he was dialing it up easy. It was obviously he had some adrenaline going too. But one of those guys where at that time too, his future wasn't exactly certain what he was going to be. There were still very real conversations about him being a starter, people clinging to that. But this was a way, like you said, in a really important time for where the Reds were at, trying to boost their way to a World Series run. They were calling up every single bullet they had. And Aroldis Chapman was the biggest one. And he shined in that moment. We've seen, obviously, what he did in Cincinnati in the years that followed. But, yeah, for a relief pitcher, it's how many guys have had that kind of debut or even that kind of anticipation, realistically?
Yeah, when he started the year in the minors, he was going to be penciled in as a starter. But once he transitioned to the bullpen, I think his ERA went down by like 2, right?
It was one of those things where it made everyone could kind of see the writing on the wall. The stuff as a starter, he just, between the delivery, how hard he threw, it didn't really make sense. But at that time, there was still, hope, still questions. Can we develop him into this? Who knows what Aroldis Chapman's ceiling ultimately is? And really, it felt like that kind of stretch run right there. It gave you just about everything you needed to know.
Absolutely. It's one of those debuts, and a lot of 2010 here. Wow. So I think the most recent one we had there was 2016, but other than that, we were all about the 2010s. All right. Now, more contemporary stuff. That was fun. Maybe we'll do that more often as the weeks go by when we look back at the great 2010s. I know you love the 2010s. One of your favorite decades of baseball, isn't it? Okay. Now, Ohtani in the home run derby quickly before we get to the foreign substances here. I think that's going to be a very, very hot topic conversation, that we're going to have. You got to be excited. We talked about this last week. Shohei Ohtani in Colorado.
I got to listen. Before anything, thank you, Shohei Ohtani, because where baseball is at right now, with everything going on in the media, how bad the sport is being destroyed by different people talking about it negatively, by some pitchers just not giving the sport a great look, some guys within the game overall not giving it a great look. Shohei Ohtani's been the biggest star this year on a mainstream level, bringing people in, making Sports Center, getting those, viral tweets and different stuff. Even from the memes, like something about this guy, he's just a content machine, making the faces he does on the mound and different stuff like that. And we're saying all this. He's also tied for the MLB lead in home runs with Vlad Guerrero Jr. at 23. He has a chance in this home run derby, even if it doesn't go perfectly for him, even if it's an average performance, to have arguably the sport's biggest star on that platform. Baseball badly needs it. And I give credit to him. He didn't see it as a big deal. He's like, it's BP. I'm just going to have a good time and kind of rock with it. Shohei Ohtani's great for baseball, and I'm so happy that this sport has someone like him.
It's a yes to Shohei Ohtani in the home run derby, and it's a no to Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who is not going to be in the derby. He's surely going to be in the game itself, but he won't be in the derby. Are you disappointed at all, or should we just move on and forget about it?
From a personal standpoint, would I have loved to see him? Of course. But he made history last time he was in the home run derby with the performance he put on. And in an MVP year where he is, the Blue Jays really need a strong second half here to kind of get back to the top of that AL East race. I can't blame him for wanting at least a mental break from that part of the, events during All-Star weekend. Listen, we see enough of Vlad Guerrero Jr. during the season. The fact that he's already been willing to do it in the first place tells me everything I need to know. So yeah, I'm not upset about it. There's plenty of participants that can really have a great time with it. And I bet he does it at some point in the future. And the other thing is he had some real swing mechanics, be altered over the offseason. I don't blame him for wanting to risk that for a home run derby.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe next year or the year after, but not in a year where you just went over a huge adjustment, right? You don't want to just go in a derby now. Okay, so that's going to be exciting. Let's get to the foreign substance now, because I think, were hinting at it at the beginning of talking about Ohtani. So the reactions mid-games, by the way, let me just say this. As we're recording this has only been around for 2.5 days. Okay, the enforcement of these rules. So I want to just tell everybody, okay, can we just give this some time? Okay, I know Max Scherzer is not a fan of this. Okay, but let's give it some time. The reactions mid-game, him, Sergio Romo's pulling down his pants, literally. It's a little dramatic. Come on. Can we just go through it? You were telling me, and I missed this, but Ohtani being checked for the first time here on Wednesday, June 23rd, he was cool about it, cool as a cucumber, didn't make a big fuss about it.
No, I would compare it just like to Jacob deGrom, who walked over, said, hey, what do you need from me? Here you go. Ohtani was joking with the umps. He looked totally comfortable. Listen, we all know Major League Baseball has made some mistakes in this process. What are you going to do at this point? It's already happened. They're obviously trying to clean the game up. There's evidence that cheating was going on. Should they have implemented this in season? There's plenty of reasons to say no. But it's happening, right? They're trying to do something for the game here. The pitchers did take this too far, so they play a part in this as well. And while I don't put the majority of blame on them, I do put it on Major League Baseball. Pitchers need to take some responsibility for it as well here. They're not innocent. You can't act like this is some huge surprise. I get it's frustrating, especially maybe you have a tough inning or whatever. Yesterday with Max Scherzer, the first 2 times he got checked, he gave attitude to the umpires. And I'm like, all right, I get it. Whatever. You're Max Scherzer, right? You don't want to go through this process, but everybody's going through it. If Jacob deGrom can go through it, so can you, Max Scherzer. The last time with Joe Girardi, I don't blame him for getting a little frustrated there, right? We're talking about the middle of an inning here, right after a strikeout, and he's already been checked twice in the game. And Joe Girardi goes, well, he's touching his hair a lot. He's kind of wiping through. Listen, sweat and rosin aren't illegal. We saw Trevor Bauer kind of do this little experiment a couple days ago where the ball stuck to his hand. There's just a lot of gray area in this conversation right now. I can't blame Joe Girardi for being like, what's going on here? But be realistic. You know what's going on here. He's trying to get a grip on the ball. He almost hit Alec Boehm in the face with a 95-mile-per-hour fastball a couple pitches before. It's a headache. It's going to be a lot of headaches. Sergio Romo, dude, what are you doing? Like, you didn't get checked in the middle of anything. You just got checked like every other pitcher has. And he was even more exuberant than, Scherzer was. Really just completely unbuckling his pants there. It's like, Sergio Romo, are you kidding me? You're a soft tosser, kind of a junk ball thrower. You fit right into the categories to some degree here for guys who might be trying to get by with sticky stuff at the end of their career. Why are you acting like you're so above this? Like, this is such a criminal crime. At the end of the day, if you're mad at anyone, be mad at Major League Baseball. The umpires aren't doing this. This wasn't their decision. They're just like you, working with Major League Baseball to create a game that works for everybody here. You're doing way too much. Way too much.
Yeah, it was dramatic. I mean, what's the point? And I feel like they don't even do a proper check when someone puts on the theatrics of taking their belt off, pulling their pants down. What are we doing here? The umpire in Texas, you can see, he's like, okay, can you just stop for a second? I'm trying to do my job. It doesn't make any sense. I wasn't aware, and let me know if you were aware, that a manager in the middle of an inning can now say, hey, this is suspicious. Let's do a check.
It's one of those things we just haven't really talked about or thought about, because we saw Joe Girardi do it in that situation with Scherzer. But it's another one of those little gray situations. Can you tell if Joe Girardi was doing that because he truthfully believed that, Scherzer had something in his hair? Or was it, let me throw this guy off his game because he's already thrown a little bit of a fit twice? And, Scherzer was tossing a great game at that point. We saw what it evolved to as well with, Girardi getting into it with Kevin Long, former Yankees hitting coach, now with the Nationals. And, Girardi got ejected from it. Scherzer thought, it was kind of going to him. Scherzer had stared him down as he walked off. It's just a lot of drama. It's a lot. And it's like, listen, if you're clean, you got nothing to hide. It proves the point as a whole. They walked up, they're rubbing their fingers through Max Scherzer's hair. Like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? Like they would have been able to tell between the sweat that was pouring off the dude at the time. And, I've heard, should they get like a ear swab kind of thing, like one of those little sticks that you can put on your substance and it turns a color. Like, it's just, this hasn't been thought out. And there's going to be moments like this for the rest of the year. And it scares me because it all goes back to Major League Baseball in the first place, not handling this the right way. And now we got to deal with these drama and terrible headlines.
Yeah, well, it hasn't been thought out. And what else do you expect when it's the middle of June and we're going to start enforcing it? It's like you do it in a week. Okay, here's the plan. It hasn't been thought out. And there seems to me like over the next 2 months, there's going to be a million different scenarios that we haven't even seen yet. We haven't talked about yet that are going to transpire because of this. That was one yesterday when Girardi does what he does and Scherzer takes action with that. It's just one of those things. The hair was ridiculous. That's when I said we're crossing the line here. He's got to put his head down, Max Scherzer. The umpires are putting their fingers through his hair. Are you kidding me?
Like, let's be real. Is that not kind of disrespect to the umpires who had checked him, when he walked off the 2 previous innings? Like, you looked at the dude, you checked his belt, his glove, and his hat. What more do you want? And when you're talking the middle of an inning, you're disrupting play at this point. Like, I don't think there's a real game of, pace problem when you're checking in between innings and, a guy's walking off the mound. Like, what is that? 10 seconds. But when you're striking out a guy, momentum's building, a pitcher has his rhythm and you're making him stop, who knows what arm problems that can happen, taking a couple minutes there to go through stuff. It's just, it feels unnecessary, but there's no real parameters or kind of structure built here. So when you don't have structure, things get wild.
I don't like the middle of the inning thing. I really don't. I think the momentum is very important in baseball. We've talked about this many times on this show. Pace of play, keep the momentum up. That's how you create action, different things that we all like. And I think they brought it up on the Nationals broadcast where, hey, what about the World Series? It's game 7. The guy's got a no-hitter going, and it's like the 8th or 9th inning, and the opposing manager says, hey, can you check him? I'm a little suspicious. Are we going to allow that to happen?
And that's the weird spot. And last night when I was watching it all play out, it was just like, he's been checked twice. Like, seriously, like we're doing this, like, why? And there's it looks like Major League Baseball has tried to find a way to punish these guys in their memo, where it was like, if you act in bad faith, a manager, asking for a checkup, they will be, dealt with some kind of suspension or penalty. All right. I think yesterday it's hard. Like, can you give an argument for both sides of it? You can. So where are we lying in? We all know the arbitrator. Trevor Bauer talked about this himself. It's an MLB official. It's not a fair kind of conversation we're having here. So it'll be someone from Major League Baseball kind of handling it. And I don't know. It's not a smart process. It's not a super fair process. And I don't really see a way where, these things are going to be able to go smoothly. I give credit to the pitchers that are handling it the right way, but what pitcher will snap like that if they are checked in the middle of an inning? Because, we can all think of a handful of guys who might just not deal with it, or, maybe get themselves ejected, and who knows how that affects the team.
Well, I wouldn't be too pleased if I was doing a job and in the middle of the job, someone had to check me about something. I mean, these pitchers, they're in the middle of doing something. Wait till the end of the inning when there's a break, and then you can check them. Now, I will say this, though. I have faith that this is going to improve. I mean, we're 2 days into this. Okay, so we can harp on it all we want, but let's wait a bit. Okay, I bet you in 2022, things will be a little different. Adjustments are going to be made. So I know everyone's jumping to the gun here, but we're 2 days into it. I mean, let's give it some time, or else we're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, eventually it'll become the norm. It'll be like anything, right? I do think there's something to notice between the guys who did flip out, a Scherzer, Sergio Romo, both veterans who have been in this game a long time. Sergio Romo, part of, multiple World Series runs. Max Scherzer, future Hall of Famer. Nobody can distinguish that. I think it's just one of those things where it just shows the unrest between the players right now, and Major League Baseball as a whole. And I think at some point, they're going to have to get over it. But I think you'll see these little moments as time goes along. And then the other side of it, when will an umpire make it about himself? Because we know that moment is coming as well.
Mm-hmm. I do have to say, though, I love how the whole idea of keeping it on the field and whatever happens on the field stays on the field. Joe Girardi and Kevin Long are good friends, and they keep it on the field. I mean, I bet you that when they see each other outside of the stadium, it's like nothing happened. And I do like that about baseball.
No, listen, that's all about being a competitor. And
Yeah.
I watched John Boy's kind of breakup of it, and it was cool. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or a breakdown of it, and just to see it, K Long, what do you got to say? And then they're sitting in the dugout, they're like, oh, getting held back by the umpire, the classic. Like, it's cool, like in that moment to see a little, kind of energy and stuff like that. But it shouldn't be coming out because of stuff like this. It should be coming out because it's a competitive game, or there's a play, even if it's, a close call or something like that. Let it be part of the game. You know what I mean? Don't let it be something where we're talking cheating, foreign substance, in an issue that's clouding the entire sport right now.
I will say this. I had people message me yesterday who don't really watch that much baseball say, this is kind of fun. What's going on right now? I'm intrigued by this.
It's almost frustrating, right? Because like a lot of the guys I work with are football guys and basketball guys, and they're like, wow, they're like, that was pretty fun. Yeah, it's pretty fun, for a headline for a day. But for the people who watch baseball on a daily basis, you start to realize what it's taking away from, and it's the game itself. And, while this headline's fun, if this happens 5-6 more times, eventually it's just going to get really annoying.
So the trade deadline's coming up, and I'm sure that we're going to talk more about the foreign substances as the year goes on. It might become the story of 2021. I wrote something a couple of weeks ago. I said, it started out as the year of the pitcher, but no, that has to be on hold because this year is now going to be about the crackdown on foreign substances. Okay, now, the Diamondbacks are going to be an intriguing team at the trade deadline because there are some fascinating pieces. I look at Eduardo Escobar, a number of guys, okay? They are not a good team. I think Lovello has got to be out the door soon. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens sooner than we think. This team, I think they're a lot better than they're playing. I have to tell you, I look at their lineup coming into it. I know Zach Gallen's been injured. He's a key part to what they're doing there. They're a disaster.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, if you're looking at what the opening day roster was, it was like, all right, obviously they're not going to compete with the Padres or, the Dodgers. But if you looked at them and the Giants, you were like, all right, I wouldn't say there's too much of a gap. Obviously, the Giants have played out of their mind this year. But the Diamondbacks, between a really slow start, and I felt like it all started with Ketel Marte getting hurt really early in the year. He's kind of the motor of that team, unfortunately going down with another injury yesterday. Doesn't seem to be anything serious, but we all know what Ketel Marte, these little nagging injuries for him, they just end up being something. And he's having a great year. He's played about 36 games, and I'm pretty sure the batting average is about 340. But just going down the list of names here, right? Ketel Marte going down, Carson Kelly, who has been one of their best hitters this year, fracturing his wrist. Zach Gallen going on the IL twice, just now coming back. Madison Bumgarner had a nice stretch earlier in the year, but he got hurt. Luke Weaver going down, Tyler Clippard going down, Chris Davinsky going down. It's a lot of their pitching, and it sucks. No team in baseball can overcome pitching injuries. It's just how it goes. It reminds me a little bit of the 2020 Red Sox, where you knew their pitching wasn't this bad. They definitely weren't the deepest arm or rotation in the league, but they had enough. Couple injuries, or really several injuries, and once you get deserted, you're out there running out quadruple A arms, shuffling the bullpen, and it creates a disaster for anybody. And while their lineup has plenty of, interesting kind of components to it, it doesn't mean anything if they're down 5-0, 6-0. They're blowing huge leads like they did to the Giants recently and losing 17 out of 18. The road games, 21 in a row. Dude, that historically bad here. They're one game away from tying the all-time record.
Yep. And here's the thing. Here's what's really worrisome about Arizona right now. Not just the division. We know the division is stacked. With the Giants playing the way they are, it just makes matters worse. But they're not in competitive games right now. You know who I'm going to give credit to? The Rockies. They've played competitive baseball for the most part. They're not winning games necessarily. They're definitely not a winning team. But they're competitive. You see they beat the Padres here. They can hang in a little bit with the Dodgers. They're playing baseball where it's like, all right, the fan base can say, there's a piece here, there's a piece there. Let's add this, let's add that. And we should be middle of the pack in a few years, hopefully. You can't say that with Arizona right now. And it's almost like you need to strip everything down. Madison Bumgarner being on that team, it's not a good look too. With the contract, knowing what position the team was in at that time. So there's a lot of nightmarish scenarios for Arizona and their fans here.
And it speaks that Madison Bumgarner signing, it was supposed to be because they were entering a real competitive window. That's what it was about. He was supposed to be that bulldog at the top of the rotation. And, Zach Gallen looked like a future ace. And obviously the injuries have kind of ruined that this year, but it's just a tough time for that franchise as a whole. Obviously, Mike Hazen's going through some really tough personal things outside. The Athletic had put an article out on it. So, best wishes to him. But, when an organization as a whole, there's not many bright spots and different stuff going on, it can kind of weigh. And I like Torey Lovello. I still think he'd be a great bench coach somewhere. He was amazing under John Farrell and really great his first couple of years in Arizona. But voices get tired, especially when nothing's going right for a franchise. And sometimes it's not even on the manager as a whole. I think this is just a lot of bad luck, a lot of bad timing. And, it doesn't look like they're going to trade Ketel Marte, according to most reports. But if a team overwhelms them, it's hard at the same time to say no.
Yep. And with Torey Lovello, a lot of people may be, especially people, if you're in the Phoenix area, you might just know Torey Lovello for a few years here. We know Lovello going back like almost a decade now, okay? Like from both scenarios here. So Lovello is a guy that, and I'm with you, I always liked him. And I always thought that he would have an opportunity for a job. This is real unfortunate. And I think that San Francisco game that you referred to, that just kind of put the icing on the cake. If you can't win road games, that's what I'm saying. Like the Rockies, they're not in a stretch where they're that bad. And I'm comparing the two because everyone thought the Rockies would be the worst team in the league, and they're in the same division as Arizona.
Yeah, the sad thing is for a Rockies franchise that's been so deprived of pitching, they have at least had a couple serviceable arms. You know what I mean? Arms to get them by in that rotation. And once Zach Gallen and Bumgarner went down, and even before Bumgarner went down, he was really struggling. Their starting pitching's terrible. It's just bad. And there's no way to really go around it. You look at the Rockies, you got Marquez, you got Gray, you know what I mean? the piece that came over from the Nolan Arenado deal, Austin Gomber. You know what I mean? Like, and obviously he's hurt right now, but that was another arm. Like, it just, there's nothing. There's none of those bright spots right now for the Diamondbacks. And they really just, it feels like they need a serious kind of, at least a retool. And that's been the conversation about keeping Ketel Marte. You know, he's under team control through 2024, I believe. But I feel like it's going to take even more than that, if I'm being honest with you.
Definitely going to be one of those teams at the deadline. You would expect a whole fire sale, except for Ketel Marte. They have some flexibility and options there. Now, quickly before we wrap up, Byron Buxton, this was a guy in the first 2 weeks of the season. Me and you were talking about this guy could be MVP in the AL. The Twins have not been good this year, and Buxton is injured once again. Your concern level on Buxton long term?
Huge. I hate to be this person, but every single time he comes back from the IL, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for the tweet. Every time I see it on my phone, I remember how frustrated I used to get, you know. One of the most exciting number one prospects we've had in recent years, just from a pure athletic